Hello, everyone. It's me, Brandon Coprich, again with Brandon's COVID-19 Reading Quarter and our read of The Stranger by Caroline Cooney. We last left chapter 4. Nicoletta has started accepting the terms of her new life, not being with her friends, but it's kind of okay because she sees Jethro. She's going to meet him for lunch and hopefully she can move on and talk to him. But during history class, Christo asks her out to the dance, to the surprise of really everyone. And so now she's torn because he's the boy that she's always thought that she would want. But now she has seen Jethro. And we ended chapter 4 with Nicoletta seeing Jethro in the cafeteria, and on his way to him, Christo grabs her arm and she is pulled away, but all she can think about is Jethro. So let's see what our protagonist Nicoletta does next. This is The Stranger, chapter 5. After lunch, Jethro did not come to art appreciation. Nicoletta stared, stunned at his vacant seat. "Is Jethro absent?" asked the teacher. "He was here at lunch," said Nicoletta. Her lips were numb. "He's cutting," said Mr. Morrison disapprovingly. He pressed down hard with his pencil in the attendance book. "He cut class because I cut him," thought Nicoletta. "Oh, Jethro, I was going to explain it to you. I was going to..." But what was there to explain? She had behaved terribly. She had arranged to meet Jethro in the cafeteria. She had done so, and then what had she done? Walked off with another boy. His empty seat mesmerized her as much as the occupied seat had. His name filled her head and her heart as if it really were her heartbeat. Jethro, Jethro. Like a nursery rhyme, her head screamed, Jethro, Jethro. And of course, after school up came Christo, Christo, smiling and eager and offering her a ride home. It was by car that romance was established. When a boy gave you rides or you gave him rides, it meant either you lived next door and had no choice, or you were seeing each other. If you didn't want the school to make that interpretation, you had to fill your car with extras. Christo had always filled his van with extras, but now he stood alone. He must have told them already that they had to find another way home. For the usual van crowd was not there, and the much complimented Anne Louise was not in evidence. But Nicoletta could not go home with Christo. She had to find Jethro. She had to go back down that lane, follow that shortcut he took to his house, and locate him. How many lies it took to make Christo go on without her. How awful each one of them was. Because, of course, he had to believe her lies, or else know that she was dumping him. Know that she did not want to be alone with him or go for a ride with him. When you're in love, the possibility that the object of your love has better things to do is the worst of all scenes. So Christo just smiled uncertainly and said at last, "I'll call you tonight." "Great," said Nicoletta, smiling as if it were great. They did not touch. For Christo, it was the not touching of a crush, physical desire so intense it pulled him back instead of rushing him on. For Nicoletta, it was a heart that lay elsewhere. But Christo did not know. Love rarely does. Nicoletta waited inside the lobby until she saw Christo's van disappear. And then she gathered her books and her belongings and ran out the school doors, up the road, across the street, and down the quiet lane. There was no Jethro ahead of her. Of course not. He had left at noon, abandoning his lunch and his classes because of her. She ran and was quickly out of breath. Today there was no sun. The last of the snow had vanished into the brown earth. The words Jamie had used were now horribly the right ones. These woods were dank and dark. At the end of the lane, she saw the boulder, big and scared and motionless. Of course, it was motionless, she said to herself. It's a rock. They're always motionless. And yet the huge stone sat there as if it had just returned for some dreadful errand. The stone waited for her. It's a rock, she said to herself. Put there by a glacier. That's all it is. She might have come to the end of the world instead of the end of the little dirt road. The sky lay like an unfriendly blanket over the woods that was silent as tombs. She clung to her books as if to a shield, as if spears might come from behind the great gray stone and pierce her body. It took all of her courage to edge around the boulder. On the other side of the rock was a footpath of remarkable straightness, in a part of the world that was all ups and downs, crevices and hills, rocky cliffs and hidden dells. Here was an utterly flat stretch of land and a trail from a geometry test. The quickest way between 2 points is a straight line. What are the 2 points? Thought Nicoletta. Is his house at the other end? Jethro, she thought. I'm coming. Where are you? What will you say when I find you? Why am I looking? She walked down the trail. When she looked back over her shoulder, the boulder was watching her. She whimpered and picked up speed, running again, trying to turn a corner so the stone could not see her. But there were no corners, and no matter how far she ran, the stone was still there. The silence was complete. She could not hear anything of the 20th century. No motor cars, no turnpikes, no doors slamming, no engines revving, no planes soaring. The only sounds were her own sounds, trespassing in this dark and ugly place. Abruptly, the trail descended. She heaved a sigh of relief as mounded earth blocked her from the terrible boulder. She wondered where she would come out, and if perhaps she could return to her own home from another direction. She did not want to go back on that path. The trees ended and the vines ceased crawling. The ground was clear now, and the path became a narrow trail on top of a man-made earthen embankment. Suddenly, there were lakes on each side of her, deep, black, soundless lakes with a thin, crackled layer of ice. She could go neither left nor right. Not once had there been a choice, a turning place, a fork in the road. Now she could not even blunder off into the meadow or forest because the trail was the only place to put a foot. The trail ended. She could not believe it. It had stopped dead. It simply did not go on. In front of her was a rock face 100 feet high. Behind her lay a narrow path and the twin lakes. She was being watched. She could feel eyes everywhere assessing her, wondering what she would do next. They were not friendly eyes. She wanted to scream Jethro's name, but even drawing a breath seemed like a hostile act in this isolated corner. What would a shout do? What horrible creatures would appear if she screamed? She put a hand out so she could rest against the rock face, and her hand went through the rock. She yanked her hand back to the safety of her school book clasp. Tears of terror wet her cheeks. Mommy, she thought. Daddy, Jamie, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. It was a cave. It was so black, so narrow, cut into the cliff that at first she had not seen it. It was nothing natural. It had been chipped by some ancient tool. The opening was a perfect rectangle. She did not even have to duck her head walking in. The wonder was that she did walk in. Even as she was doing it, she was astonished at herself. She, a girl who hated the dark or being alone in the dark or even thinking of the dark, was voluntarily entering an unknown cave. Was she so terrorized that her terror had become an anesthetic, flattening her thoughts? Or was she finally getting a grip on her ridiculous fabricated fears and handling them like an adult? She stepped into the cave. She had expected absolute black darkness, especially with her own body blocking whatever weak sunlight might penetrate at this angle. But the cave walls themselves seemed to emanate light. They were smooth and polished like marble. She slid a bare hand over them, and the texture was rich and satisfying. The cave was not damp or bat-like. It seemed more like an entrance to a magnificent home where she would find beautiful tapestries and perhaps a unicorn. She followed a shaft of light, even when the cave turned and the opening to the world behind her disappeared, even when the cave went down and she had to touch the wall for support. Part of her knew better. Part of her was screaming, "Stop this! Get out! Go home! Think!" But more of her was drawn on, as all humans are drawn to danger. The wild and impossible excitement of the unknown and unthinkable. She did not know how far she went into the cave. She did not know how many minutes she had spent moving in, deeper, further from the only opening she knew. She paused for breath. And in that moment, the cave changed personality. Gone was the elegant marble. In a fraction of a second, the walls had turned into dripping horrors. Holes and gaping openings loomed like death traps. Whistling sounds and flying creatures filled her ear and her hair. She whirled to run out, but the cave went dark. Completely, entirely dark. Her scream filled the cave, echoing off the many walls, pouring out like holes like some burning torch. "Jethro!" she screamed. "Jethro!" She touched a wall and it was wet with slime. She fell to her knees, scraping them on something. And then something moved beneath her. She was not falling. The earth was lifting, arranging itself against her, attaching herself to her. She actually tried to fall, anything to free herself from the surface of the underworld that clung to her, sucking like the legs of a starfish. "Jethro!" she screamed again. Tentacles of slime and dripping stone wrapped themselves around her body. "I will die here. No one will know. Who could ever find me here? Nobody has been in this cave for 100 years. This is some leftover mine from the olden days, abandoned and forgotten. And Jethro, he could live anywhere. What on earth had made me think that the walk through the woods was necessary that led to Jethro's house? What on earth had made her think that she could find Jethro by following a path that led only to a cave? Nothing on earth, she thought. Something in hell. This is an opening to some other terrible world. The creatures of that other world were surfacing and surrounding her, dragging her down with them. Jethro, she screamed again, knowing that there were no creatures, that there was only a mine shaft. She must stay calm. She must find her own way out. She must stop fantasizing. She must be capable. She tried to remember that the calming techniques Mrs. Quincy used before magical concerts. Breathe deeply over 4 counts. Shake your fingertips. Roll your head gently in circles. It turned out that you had to be pretty calm to start with in order to attempt calming techniques. Screams continued to pour from her mouth as if somebody else occupied her. I'm the only one here, Nicoletta told herself. I must stop screaming. This is how people die in the wilderness. They panic. I must not panic. I'm the only one here, and... She was wrong. She was not the only one there. The cave filled with movement and smell, and she was picked up, actually held in air by whatever else was in the cave with her. A creature from that other, lower, darker world. Its skin rasped against hers like sawgrass. Its stink was unbreathable. Its hair was dead leaves crisping against each other and breaking off in her face. Warts of sand covered it, and sand actually came off on her, as if the creature were half made out of the cave itself. She could not see anything, only feel and smell it. It was holding her, as if in an embrace. Would it consume her? Did it have a mouth and jaws? Would it carry her down to wherever it laid? Would it line its nest with her or feed her to its young? She was no longer screaming. Its terrible stench took too much from her lungs, and she could not find the breath to scream, only to gag. And then it carried her up, not down, out, not in, and spoke. English. Human English. Never come back, it said, its voice as deep and dark as the cave itself. She actually laughed, hysteria crawling out of her as screams had moments before. I won't, she said. I'm having a conversation with a monster, she thought. It's unsafe, it said. I could tell. The walls became smooth and they glowed. The beautiful patterns of shiny entrance surrounded them. She looked at what held her and screamed again in horror. She had never seen such a nightmare, never been caught in such a hideous, vivid dream. The features of the thing were humanoid, but the flesh dripped like cave walls. Old sayings came true. There was literally light at the end of the tunnel, real light. Sunlight, daylight. She flung herself free from the thing's terrible embrace. Falling, slipping, running all at the same instant, Nicoletta got out of the cave. Never had a gray sky been so lovely, so free, so perfect. Never had dark lakes and bleak woods been so appealing and friendly. She held up her hands to the real world, incredibly grateful to be back. The sight of her bare hands reminded her she no longer held her school books. The thing stood slightly behind the mouth of the cave, so its shadow did not itself was visible. The books sat neatly in a pile by the opening. Had Nicoletta set them down like that? "Don't come back," the thing said again, with a sadness so terrible that Nicoletta dissolved from fear into pity. Nicoletta knew what loneliness was, and she heard it in that awful voice. It lives down there, she thought. It's caught forever in that terrible dark. How ridiculously petty to be fretting for a larger house and a separate room. She could be sentenced to this, whatever this was. She would never have gotten out without this creature's help. She would have died down there. She felt a strange bond between them, the bond of a rescuer and the rescued. Her need to run and scream had ended with the sunlight. "Are you alone?" she asked. "No," it said sadly. "Alone would be better." What a terrible company it must have to think it alone was better. "Don't come back," it whispered. "Not ever. Don't even think about it. Not ever. Promise. Promise me that you will never even think about coming back here." And that is the end of chapter 5. Guys, wow, that was a full-fledged, that was a long one, but we learned so much. Nicoletta has, she's abandoning Christo to go find Jethro, and she's stumbled into this dark, twisted world with this cave monster. Oh my God, who saw this coming? Anyway, if you want to know what happens next, gotta tune in to chapter 6. I'll be here. I'll keep putting them out for you guys. I hope this is helping. As always, until next time, good night. Much love.